sports. Today, former police officer Derek Chauvin was sentenced to 22 and a half years in prison for the murder of George Floyd. Here's Floyd's nephew reacting.
We got justice, but not enough justice. When you think about George being murdered in cold blood with a knee on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, execution style in broad daylight, 22 and a half years is not enough.
This comes as lawmakers reach an agreement on the framework for police reform more than a year after Floyd's murder. It also comes as President Biden is working to deal with the rise in gun violence and homicide rates. On Wednesday, he laid out his plan for community policing and gun control.
It means more police officers, more nurses, more counselors, more social workers, more community violence interrupters to help resolve issues before they escalate into crimes.
I want to come to you, Zolan, first about the Chauvin sentencing. This was a long sentence, but there are people, of course, the family included, who are disappointed in the sentence. What does it mean, you think, for the justice system in our country that what we saw today?
Look, I mean, if you go out into communities and if you talk to criminal justice advocates, if you go out into communities of color, it's very easy to understand why one conviction, one sentence would not provide the satisfaction that maybe, well, I haven't met anybody who expected any satisfaction from this, but it's hard to believe that you would find that. And you heard that from folks after this sentencing as well. And I believe there was another activist there who also said, look, until we stop seeing so many of these incidents, stop seeing so many of these killings really in the news, how really can we tout any sort of progress here? Now, that's a good way to segue too, because another thing that was brought up are the efforts being made in terms of police reform right now. You saw quickly after this sentence an effort to galvanize support and turn it into a way to try and push Congress to pass legislation on police reform. I find it interesting that that comes around the same time that the president has also rolled out pretty much an anti-crime strategy, right? And I mean, that is a reflection of some shifting dynamics that we're seeing in the Democratic Party as well. I know there were a lot of talks about defunding the police, which is still very, very relevant if you go and talk to certain individuals and certain members of the Democratic Party. But with the recent mayoral race in New York City, as well as—
wake-up call for a lot of people.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, look, you have Eric Adams, former officer as well, who appealed to folks and said, there is rising crime here. Just to put that in context, though, 20 years ago, there's about 2,626 murders in New York. I believe there were roughly 400 last year. There are rising homicides in cities. It does matter to various communities, including communities of color, but it's not too hard to understand why, when you see a police officer who's sworn to protect you shooting you, that you would also find that to also be quite relevant.
Well, that's why we brought you to the table, because you just broke down so much, and I think people really need to understand these crime rates in context. Eva, I want to come to you. The Floyd family's talking about wanting to see police reform. There was this press release so far on this police framework. What do we know about what actually could get done here?
Well, it's been delayed and delayed. They've set up several deadlines for the past several weeks and have kept having to push past those deadlines. It kind of feels like a flight that you know is going to be canceled, and you keep getting that delay after delay after delay. That's what this debate over police reform looks like. I will say, though, there are all serious people debating this bill. Congresswoman Karen Bass, Senator Booker, Senator Scott. These are all people that don't just want to do this for show. They genuinely want a deal. But we will have to see. It seems as though the sticking points remain the same. This issue of qualified immunity, how much legal protection officers should be entitled to. Those all seem the same. And I think ultimately, there isn't going to be that much wiggle room on that. It's going to be what progressives will agree to. Will they allow for a police registry? Will they allow some of these other reforms to move forward without qualified immunity? Some of the members of the squad have already said absolutely not. It's qualified immunity or nothing, but we'll have to see.
I just want to say one other thing. I mean, this is the most, to put it in context, though, this is the most sweeping reform of police laws in our lifetime.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. It's going to be a tough pill to swallow. I just think that even if there's some change on qualified immunity, a lot of people are going to find it really hard to oppose this, just because, like you said, these are the most serious people in the room, and putting forth something that's just really sweeping.
And Mike, I want to come to you. What does the Biden administration say about the spike in crime? What do they believe is going into this, and how are they kind of balancing this as we think about the president's past and his history on crime?
The White House was very clear that they attribute a lot of this spike in violence, which they carefully point out, they say has happened over the last 18 months, which extends beyond his time in office, to the pandemic. And that's why one of the things he did this week was free up COVID relief money to allow police departments, states, and local governments to fund the police, to add and to provide more training, other resources for local law enforcement. If you look at the two constituencies who have been the bedrock of Joe Biden's political support since he ran for office for the first time in 1970, it is African-American voters and it is suburban voters. Look at the political geography of Delaware. It's Newcastle County, so suburban, and Wilmington, heavily African-American. That's what made him the nominee and made him president as well. And so tracing his trajectory on crime issues specifically over time very closely traces the sort of mainstream of the Democratic Party specifically on this. That's why the 1994 crime bill was a bit more regressive in today's views, but that was the view of the time. And the policy he rolled out this week is very much a message to the party against defund the police, but also including a lot of resources for African Americans.
And also today, Vice President Kamala Harris was at the U.S.-Mexico border in El Paso, Texas. Republicans have criticized her for not going sooner. The visit comes as several Republicans, including former President Donald Trump, plan to visit the border next week. Zolan, this is your beat, your White House reporter, but we all know that you are very much plugged into national security and the border. Why is she going? What's this visit gonna do for her?
The vice president, if she had her choice, the reporting would show, would rather be talking about anti-corruption in Central America, her trip to Central America, the investments that the U.S. is making into women's businesses in Guatemala and Mexico City. But unfortunately, because she had to stumble when asked whether or not she was going to visit the border during that trip, that now dominates the entire news cycle. It completely derailed all of the work that they set out to do at that point. It's also hard to ignore the fact that former President Donald Trump is visiting the border next week and he's going to be alongside Texas Governor Greg Abbott as well, who has pledged to also continue building a border wall that came to symbolize an immigration agenda that very much still lingers over this administration, right? When they were caught off guard earlier this year by a surge of unaccompanied minors and they did not have a shelter capacity that was fully ready to support that, or you could even go to now the fact that the administration is still implementing a Trump-era pandemic emergency rule that has effectively ended asylum for many of the families that the vice president spoke about there at the border today. So if you want a takeaway of this visit, I really think what it is it shows that President Trump might be out of the office, his administration's immigration agenda very much still having an impact both on this administration and on the ground at the border.
In the 30 seconds that we have left, Jake, I want to come to you. The politics of immigration are not going away. Zolan just hit on it. What's at play here?
Everyone knows what an immigration deal would look like on Capitol Hill. Everyone knows how to fix this problem, broadly speaking. No one has the political courage to do it. And that's what it all comes down to. We were talking about this before the show. It's the most clear-cut set of issues, clear-cut set of solutions that no one has the political courage to solve.
And even though she did go to the border, Leader McCarthy today criticizing her still. So it's not like she got any points from Republicans.
Yeah. And well, thank you all. That's all the time we have tonight. Thank you to Zolan, Eva, Mike, Jake for joining me at the table in person. And before we go tonight, we are praying for the families impacted by the tragic building collapse in the South Florida town of Surfside. As an intense search and rescue effort continues, dozens and dozens of people remain missing. My heart breaks for them.